Good, good evening, everyone. My name is Antonia von Ehrlich, and on behalf of the British-German Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this online event. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, the British-German Association is a charity and membership organisation that promotes mutual understanding and good relations between the UK and Germany. Part of what we do is to provide a vibrant forum for debates, talks, discussions, and learning about British-German relations. So we regularly put on events such as this one, along with other initiatives such as our monthly newsletter. This evening, we are honoured to welcome international award-winning director Edward Berger on Zoom, as well as Professor Dr Christiane Schönfeld. Edward Berger's critically acclaimed film, All Quiet on the Western Front, was awarded 7 BAFTAs, including Best Direction and Adapted Screenplay, along with an outstanding 9 nominations and 4 awards at this year's Oscars. Edward's work includes Deutschland 83, The Terror and Patrick Melrose, which was heralded as one of the best television shows of 2018. The event will be moderated by Dr Christiane Schönfeld, Associate Professor and Head of German Studies at Mary Immaculate College, University of Limerick in Ireland. Dr. Schönfeld's research on German language literature and cinema focuses on a wide range of cultural representations and sheds light on their significance for the public sphere. Among her publications are books and articles on literary and visual cultures from the 19th to the 21st century. Her most recent book, The History of German Literature on Film, will be available, I think, in the next few days in July, on the 27th. Today's event is particularly meaningful to me as it is also my last event at the BGA. As many of you will know, I have been inspired by my time at the association to pursue further academic study in international relations from September. I'm therefore delighted to take this opportunity to introduce my successor, Dr. Tamara Arballe, who is on tonight's call and who will be taking over my role as Programme and Membership Lead. It has been a real privilege to work with the BGA on fostering British-German relations over the past 4 years. As Edward Berger's film poignantly shows, our goal of creating understanding is of great importance, and I thank you for your continued support and dedication to the association. Before handing over to Christiane, a quick note on the technology. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the discussion, and we encourage you to submit your questions throughout the event. So please send in any queries via the Q&A function, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click on it, you can start typing up and sending in questions. You have the option to like someone else's question, and the more likes a question gets, the higher up it goes on the list. So on that note, over to you, Christiane.
Thank you very much, Antonia, for the introduction and for inviting me to speak to Edward Berger. This is very exciting. Thank you very much for being here, Edward. It's a real pleasure. And yeah, I look forward to discussing All Quiet on the Western Front with you for the next about 40-45 minutes, I'd say, and then we'll see what kind of questions have come in and we'll turn it over to the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a great pleasure. Yeah, I mean, from my side as well, I mean, Antonia mentioned it already, you know, what a fantastic success All Quiet on the Western Front has been. 14 BAFTA nominations, 9 Oscar nominations. I mean, especially in the English-speaking world, but, you know, you've received all sorts of other awards as well. You won 4 Oscars for the film, including Best International Feature Film, which is actually, you know, quite unique. I mean, no other German language film won more Academy Awards at the Oscars. So, you know, my warm congratulations.
Thank you.
Your film is obviously based on a greatly successful source text, and I'll just talk a little bit about Remarque for a minute or two before I start asking questions, just to contextualize everything a little bit. Remarques Im Westen nichts Neues was published in 1929, and it was also incredibly successful. I mean, the first edition sold out within days. A year later, more than 1 million copies of the novel had been sold already, and the text was being translated into initially 26 languages, which was quite unique at the time. It obviously touched a nerve in many of Remarque's generation, which, you know, suffered the consequences of World War I. Remarque's bestseller describes the every day of war, the horror of combat, while flashbacks time and again convey the young soldier's naive enthusiasm for male heroism, which was instilled in protagonist Paul Bäumer and his adolescent classmates by their teachers and other authority figures. The novel was adapted to film by director Louis Milestone, first of all, in 1930. And even today, it's considered one of the most important anti-war films of all time. And when you look at kind of the 100 most important American films, Milestone's All Quiet on the Western Front is always there. The Nazis, of course, tried to get this anti-war film banned and the novel, which they actually did where they could, even before 1933, when they came to power. In May of 1933, Remarque's works were burnt, along with most other important writers of the time in Germany. And he subsequently lost citizenship and was left a stateless exile. In 1979, so 50 years after the original adaptation or the publication of the novel, a British-American TV production followed Milestone's adaptation. It was directed by Delbert Mann, and although by then the novel had been translated into more than 60 different languages and was the most widely read originally German text globally, that film actually didn't leave much of an imprint. Now, your new All Quiet on the Western Front adaptation, in contrast, has become a huge international success. You're the first German director to reimagine Remarque's important anti-war novel. I think that's also important. What brought you to the project? Why this text? If it was the novel, what was the starting point and what attracted you to the project?
Well, the starting point was surely when I was probably 15 and read the novel and remember what an impact it had on me. And then I also remember walking by a television set, our black and white television set, when I was maybe a year older or something, and seeing the last, I came in the last maybe 10 minutes of the Milestone movie, and just remember, I remember how that last shot left, and I asked, "Oh, what is that?" And then my father, I think, was watching and said, "Oh, that's All Quiet on the Western Front." And I remember watching the last shot, and that also left an indelible imprint, like when he reaches out for a butterfly and gets shot in that film. And so and then I read the book again in my 20s. I saw the film many times in my 20s when I studied film, and then that sort of went away, that feeling. But when Malte Grunert, my producer, called me about 3.5 years ago and said, "What do you think? Is it a good idea to get the rights to All Quiet on the Western Front? Because I think I could get them." I immediately thought, "Oh, damn, why didn't I have that idea?" I thought it was such a good idea. I had a huge amount of respect of the idea, but I thought it felt like a blind spot, that why had no one ever made this film? It's the biggest, as you pointed out, it's the biggest German novel. It's sold so many times, and no one ever made this film in its original language before, and with the feeling of how we grew up in Germany, because I certainly grew up with a deep sense of responsibility towards this history, and a deep sense of guilt and shame about it. And that, it just felt like an opportunity to talk about this sense of guilt, shame, and responsibility, to let that out in that film, and to have our feeling influence every single shot of the film. And I thought that, since, Germany's, to my knowledge, the only country that was at the heart of 2 world wars, or started them, there's a special perspective from Germany that I think we can share well with the rest of the world, and that impetus was there to say, oh, I really want to sort of put my feeling into this movie. And I think this movie automatically will be very different from an American or British war film, because our history towards these wars is very different. And I wanted to share that with audiences from around the world.
That's
I'm sorry,
very...
I keep drinking out of my water bottle, if I may.
Oh, absolutely.
My plastic water bottle.
I've got some water here as well. That's very, very interesting. I mean, coming from the German perspective and sharing, yeah, as you said, you know, that sense of responsibility, you know, for the future in light of the past that we share and the way we grew up in Germany. I think that, you know, every time we say we're German, every time we speak the language, that history is part of who we are and our identity. But nonetheless, I mean, could you tell us a little bit more about the adaptive process? I mean, when you have a novel like Remarks, there are still so many decisions that need to be made. I mean, from the actors, you know, who will be center stage in the film, to the lighting and the everything, the costumes, the music. And I mean, you refer to British or American war films. I mean, the score, for example, is quite interesting. I mean, when you compare that to something like 1917, probably one of the most recent war films by Mendes, which has a very kind of emotional, you know, pathetic score. And there are so many decisions along the way that can be taken that could actually move the narrative into a different light. And it seems when I watch the film, every time I watch it, I feel you've managed to be very clear about where you wanted to go with the film. I think this is probably why it works so well and why so many people respond so positively to it.
Well, we wanted to tell the story of Paul Bäumer and really make the audience feel what he feels, put them in his shoes, really take his subjective experience of, you know, running through this, being thrown into this war and running through it, and turning from a young, innocent man, but with full of enthusiasm and youth in his eyes, and you know, wanting to be this hero, to a killing machine, to someone who ages before his age and loses his soul, and becomes a dehumanized killing machine. And that we wanted to show, and we and follow Paul every step of the way, and wanted to make the audience feel what he feels. And so a lot of decisions go into that. You mentioned all the departments, and the music, the costumes, the production design, the mud, the makeup in the face, you know, that all comes, I think that all comes from inside of us, you know, from every single one of the crew members, you know, making a decision of imbuing the film of the feeling of how you know, how we grew up, to put that into the movie. And that, and also the music, for example, since you pointed it out, felt like I told Volker, you know, I don't want anything sort of, let's not emotionalize this. Let's rather break the image. Let's destroy it. Let's put a distance between us and the images, you know, because I didn't want it to be sort of a simple get, you know, like get the audience and tear jerk the audience. I wanted to be a very relentless film that is also hard to watch, you know, that is sort of at the end leaves you sort of a little bit, hopefully a little bit broken and empty, just like Paul. You know, when he gets called into the battle, into the last battle by the general, he's basically just going and he doesn't care. and he's just dead in his eyes, and he's exhausted. And that exhaustion, I kind of wanted the audience to feel, just feel like, oh, crushed. And it's not an easy task to put the audience through. And but it's not an easy movie I didn't want to make a movie that's just entertaining and just digestible. I wanted to make a hard watch, to bring the feeling across of, what possibly this war could have meant to everyone involved.
Yeah. And I mean, sound is something that we're so used to now when we watch films. I mean, when the Milestone film was shown in theaters in Germany, there were apparently lots of war veterans who had nervous breakdowns because they had never heard. I mean, this was one of the first sound films shown in Germany, and despite the fact that, they were all using different systems, and in some cinemas it didn't work as well, but where it worked, these sounds of, grenades exploding and, people screaming and so on was unbearable. It brought back, all the trauma and so on. But of course, nowadays you're dealing with audiences that are used to playing computer games, ego shooters, that are used to these sounds surrounding them a lot of the time. And I mean, obviously there are lots of war films where the music helps us along and shares an experience. But the question is that the experience that, you want the audience to share? And I mean, unlike authors like Hermann Hesse, for example, Remarque was actually really interested in the medium film and wasn't opposed to his work being adapted. I mean, he was actually hoping for that. When you embarked on the project, were you also thinking about how to make the narrative really relevant for our civil society today? I mean, this was obviously, when you're saying 3.5 years ago, that was prior to the Russians attacking the Ukraine. So war was much more distant than it feels at the moment. So were you still trying to make a film that was important for our civil society today?
Yeah, of course, Malte and I asked ourselves, why are we making this movie? It's been made in English. Does the world need this now? And that's always the big question. Why do you want to spend a few years of your life? And it's really, it's also, it's a challenging project. So, and then when people don't connect or don't watch it, it'll be a waste of everyone's time, So, so you really have to ask yourself, for who is this movie and why are we making it? Why is it important? And why now? Why not in 10 years? And 3.5 years ago when we made it, there wasn't a war in the Ukraine. It was far away. But what we did feel is that there was a rise of right-wing nationalist parties everywhere, all over the world. In America, in England, Brexit. We had, sort of back to our own nation. Back to sort of isolationism. And in France, you have a right-wing presence. You have, in Sweden and in Hungary with Orban. In Italy now, and in Germany as well. And we suddenly heard language that we hadn't heard ever before in my life. And some sentences I thought probably must have been spoken publicly last time in Germany in the 30s or 40s. And it just worried us, and it left a feeling of, disquiet and worrying us. And we thought it's it's the first step towards a conflict, when suddenly towards an armed conflict, when suddenly institutions that have brought us peace for 70 years in Europe, like the EU, are being questioned everywhere. and Europe certainly hasn't had peace for 70 years. I don't think ever, except for now, until this war, and so it just felt like a shaky time, and that's why we wanted to make that film.
And it was a good thing you did. And I mean, obviously, you had exactly the right sense that, the situation is only going to get worse if, we don't critically engage with issues like nationalism and, militarism and so on. Actually, when I watched the film recently again with one of my sons, he was particularly fascinated by the fact that it's an anti-war film that manages to tell the story of war, its reality, its horror, without even a hint of heroism. And
good. If you saw that, that's great. That's what we tried now.
Even, I mean, there are other anti-war films, and Sam Mendes' 1917 is an anti-war film as well, but there is heroism. Yeah.
Well, that very much comes from the perspective of the filmmaker. Yeah. I would say we in Germany, with our history, we cannot tell a story that has a hero. Our forefathers didn't come back as heroes. They certainly weren't heroes. They were on the wrong side of history, and they lost the war on top of it. So there's nothing positive that is in our society that was left, that we inherited. As an English filmmaker, it's a country that defended themselves twice. The film 1917 is dedicated to Sam Mendes' grandfather who fought in the war. He was probably able to tell stories of this war and how it was. England didn't want to enter this war. America were forced to. They had to defend themselves. That leaves a very different taste in the filmmaker, and that leaves sort of also the opportunity or possibility to include heroes in your story. And so I totally understand the different perspective. Wait, is it very windy when in sound, or is the sound okay? I had to do this Zoom in my mother's garden because the house is full of my brothers and sisters who are cleaning it out because she's moving. So I hope it's okay. Or is it too windy? Then I can move.
I can still hear you okay, but if Antonio or Tamara feel it's getting difficult to hear you, then
please let me know.
It's fine for the time being. We'll let you know.
Good.
And the background is so beautiful that we wouldn't really want to do without that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, that the German perspective is definitely different. And I mean, when you look at Bernhard Wickie's Second World War or anti-war film about the Second World War, Die Brücke, the bridge, like the source text by Manfred Gregor Dorfmeister, as he was called, again, yeah, there are no heroes. They're just naive boys, dying one after another after having been fed on a diet of heroic tales in school and thinking, yeah, they're going to go out and experience this great adventure and come out as heroes. And, that's obviously something that Remarque talks about as well. Was Bernhard Wickie's film or the text also something that you considered while you were making decisions about All Quiet on the Western Front?
Definitely. I mean, that film is brilliant. Seen it many times. It wasn't really the most, not many war films were that influential, except I felt I had 3 movies that I took as an inspiration. And now I'm just going to briefly move inside because it just started raining. Is that okay?
Of course.
A quick spot. I'm so sorry. I'll turn off my video while I come on and then I answer the question.
Again.
I have a less exciting background. The 3 films were actually Apocalypse Now, which I admire very much, because to me it felt like a movie. It was the first movie that I saw, maybe at age 17 or 18, that I really didn't understand, because it wasn't a conventional plot. It felt like a story or a movie that tried to capture more the essence of war rather than just a simple story, where someone goes from A to Z and has to achieve something, and I love that, but I had to watch it probably 3-4 times to really understand it. The second movie, more than the movie, probably the filmmaker is Steve McQueen, with all of his movies. But if you take Hunger or Shame or 12 Years a Slave, I feel he's a really precise filmmaker whose camera is like a razor blade. He sort of cuts right into the human condition and analyzes it. And I'm very much influenced by that, I would say, by that feeling of harsh observation. And the third film was a film called Son of Saul by Laszlo Nemes. And it was more what I love about that film is its radical perspective, to really tell the story from our hero's point of view and be always on the shoulder. Now, if Laszlo Nemes hadn't made his film in the way he did it, I would have wanted to make All Quiet like that. But as he had already done it, I had to find a new way of making our film and still have the audience feel like they're following Paul as much as possible. So I tried to find a new style for that.
I mean, I actually loved finding out about this, because it explains so much for me about the way your film functions. And I mean, the position your adaptation takes in view of war is as clear as Remarque's literary text. And I kept on wondering about how this can happen, how you can actually achieve that in film, to have that kind of precision. But the references to Nemes, to Steve McQueen, make complete sense.
Good.
Really fascinating. Now, what I was also thinking is that, obviously Remarque wrote his book during the period of New Objectivity, as the art movement that became prevalent in Germany during the 1920s, mainly as a response to and also a rejection of that kind of very spectacular, self-involved movement of expressionism, but also kind of this other modern forms of kind of romantic idealism. Art was to be sober and, thus potentially much more critical, I mean, expressionists try to be critical as well, but I think New Objectivity tried to be a lot more precise in terms of their political engagement, as an engagement with society, with life, with the human condition, so that art could really function as a political weapon once again. So when you think of, playwrights like Friedrich Wolf or Bert Brecht or Ernst Toller, now, would you also consider your work in that context? I mean,
well, that type of language or writing, I always had great sympathy for, because it doesn't try to over emotionalize. It just shows, and the audience has to provide their own context and has to provide their own interpretation. And I find it actually crueler if you can picture something like that, like a war, without falling back on, emotional tropes. And so I would say the biggest influence or the biggest North Star for a film was the book and its language and its style, as it's sort of very just matter-of-factly describing how, I mean, the book is very unemotional in a way, it doesn't try to hammer home a point in terms of, oh, the poor boy and so, but just describes. And all of us go, because everything is so terrible, go like, the poor boy, I mean, automatically. But the book doesn't try to manipulate me into, at least not with obvious ways, maybe just with also the relentless description. It's very matter-of-factly, and we try to make the movie like that, very just straight.
Yeah. No, I mean, with Remarque, we just, read about one boy dying after another, and, things like the boots that are being passed on and so on. But you did away with some of the you mentioned the ending, for example, the butterfly in the end, where he just, puts his head over the barrier, just because he wants to see that butterfly in this completely dystopic landscape. You recreated these dystopic landscapes, but nature doesn't really play a big part at all. I mean, obviously there are some scenes playing, taking part in the woods. Kaczynski and Paul Bäumer walk through the woods, but it's more about, getting food or eating, or even, relieving yourself. And you obviously consciously avoided something as perhaps beautiful and tender as a butterfly in your film.
Yeah, I mean, the butterfly I definitely couldn't put into the film because it wasn't in the book. And it's an invention of the first film, and a great invention. And as I didn't want to make a remake of the film, but a new adaptation of the book, and someone else had the idea of the butterfly, Louis Milestone did, we couldn't do that. We have to, I mean, the main reason also to make a film like this is to be different. Then, I mean, if I try to, just film the butterfly ending again, then I think everybody would have been really mad at me to say, oh, he just stole that from Louis Milestone. So you can't do that. And also, I don't want to. So, I mean, the only way to make a film like that is to possibly hopefully add something to the conversation, and not redo something that's already been done before. And I mean, there is a little bit of, I mean, a large part of the movie takes place in battle. And from my research of the time, it was really, I was fascinated by the sort of change between being on the front and then you're behind the front, which was like they called it Etappe in German. They called it the field camp, basically. They went on Etappe, like on and for a week, and then they went back to the front for a week to 10 days, and always alternating, and sleeping for a whole week in the bunkers on the front lines, and then sort of recreation. And that's the only moment of sort of peace and beauty and holiday. And it did feel like, at least from the research that I have, they did feel like, oh, we're on holiday now. Let's have a party. Let's drink. Let's eat. Let's do all the fun stuff that we can't get to do. And it was really this change between, and so that's the only moment in the film where I would say there's a little bit of relief and a little bit of nature and quiet and so forth, but it doesn't last very long. But also, I mean, it was very important to me to create pockets of quiet in the movie, so that it's not, that's not throwing noise at you and bombs at you, because that eventually wears off. Only when you hear the quiet in between, you're ready again to hear yeah.
Absolutely.
You're ready, you're sensitive again for the bombs.
And you have time to develop human relationships. And I mean, that scene where Kaczynski asks Paul to read the letter written by his wife to him, I thought was a very, very strong scene.
It came from research. That was a letter that was actually similar, not with the dead son and so forth that we invented, but a letter that came from research we found in an archive of a wife who had sent this. I loved the language that she used, the very old-fashioned kind of working class type of language. And I thought, oh, that would be a great letter that Kat could receive. And I thought it would go. It's actually one of my favorite scenes in the film because it's so simple. Two men reading a letter and just sort of thinking of home.
Yeah. But it tells so much about not only their age difference, but also their class difference. And
they acted so beautifully. I remember shooting it and actually we held it in this one shot for a long time, for maybe 2 minutes or so, just looking at the front of them because they were just so good. And the way Felix read this letter, very unemotional too. Another actor would have maybe taken the letter and been very emotional. Oh, your wife's reading, and he just reads it, and he's just a letter. Yeah, okay. I like he does it every day for this guy who can't read, and the way Kat listens to it is just beautiful. You see everything in his face of when Felix, and I was so entranced watching them that I couldn't make a cut in the film. I just left this two-shot.
No, it's a wonderful scene, and obviously Albert Schuch is an excellent actor.
Yes.
But Felix Kammer, I actually hadn't come across him, and I think he only did theatre work before he was chosen to play the lead in your film. And was it? Did you feel it was a risk to?
No, before I made the decision, yes, definitely, because you don't know, and I didn't know him. Felix was brought to us by the producer's wife who had worked with him in Burg Theater in Vienna, which is a very, it's basically the oldest theater in Europe and the biggest, very prestigious. But he was part of the ensemble, played small roles. They didn't really see his talent yet. He was just, when you're part of these old theaters, you have stars and so forth. You're kind of one of the players, But Sabrina, who is a dramaturg in this theater, she said, you should look at this kid. He's really good. She basically discovered him. And then she sent me a picture and I thought, wow, what a great face. And he also has a very old-fashioned face. It just felt very truthful. And we called him in. After the first time, I was still insecure, thinking and then the second time we put boots on him and a uniform, and he felt much more real. And then we brought him again and again. And by the time we were done with our tests, it wasn't a risk anymore because you kind of felt, okay, Felix is just the right person.
Well, he obviously was. He does a fantastic job. I actually asked my students last semester in one of the modules to compare him in your film with Achilles in Troy by Wolfgang Petersen.
Oh, wow. With Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt, absolutely. And they came up with, just fantastic comparisons. They had to do it in German, obviously. But the way Felix looks, the way, obviously, he's part of the mise en scène, and he has makeup on and a uniform and so on. But when you look at Brad Pitt as Achilles, with his tanned glistening upper body in the sunshine with a few splashes of blood, only kind of enhancing his physique. And then, your lead in All Quiet on the Western Front, it was definitely a good conversation to be had with students. And I think
great.
They learned a lot by comparing the two films. We still have a few minutes left. One thing I would like to know is, you've worked obviously for television a lot, Germany, and other, excellent work. You made films for cinema, Jack, and others. What was it like to work with a global player like Netflix, a streaming platform? Was there any indication that Netflix was expecting you to make something mainstream for mass audience? Were there any?
No, not at all. There was a huge amount of trust. There was a huge amount of there was a huge amount of trust. There was a huge amount of support, I've never had before. There was a huge amount of faith in our collaborative work and our vision. And in essence, you always think you hear Netflix or you hear Warner Brothers, or you think the big studios. Eventually, it's just some people. It's just, it comes down to the people who do it. And you're talking like we are talking, two people trying to make a movie together. But luckily we also had the same sort of thought of what this movie should be. So it was just a wonderful experience, really supportive. It was great.
No, because we do associate these streaming platforms, with big capital, and
but it's essentially people running it, human beings that run it, and pretty smart, intelligent people, and they know exactly what type of movie they're making for which audience. Some of them are just pure entertainment, and then the film has to be like that. It shouldn't try to make an art form out of it. It's entertainment, let's go for it. And another film is a kids movie, so let's not make it for adults, let's really make it for kids. And the third one is All Quiet. So and then if you decide for direction, you got to go in that direction all the way. And they know that, and they support that way of filmmaking.
Yeah, that's good to know. And Remarque, I wouldn't even know if Remarque is still a brand nowadays.
It is a bestseller in Germany. Still, every year they sell. I talked to the publisher. He was at our premiere. They sell 50,000 copies or so, which is a lot. And around the world, everywhere you stay, All Quiet on, everyone knows this. Everyone knows this either the movie or that it's a book. And in fact, my daughter, when I came home thinking about whether or not I should make this movie, she heard the title, and she's usually utterly uninterested in what I'm going to make. But in this case, she heard the title and said, she whipped around and said, All Quiet on the Western Front, you have to do it. I just read it in school. It's the best book I've ever read. I cried many times. And she was 17 at the time. So, it is a brand with even with young people. They know it.
Excellent. And your film obviously contributed greatly to retell that story. The pandemic happened while you were making the film. That must have been difficult. I remember coming across a photograph of you talking to Felix Kammerer and wearing a face mask, and that must impact on the way you kind of deal with actors but in
the end it probably does, but in the end you have to get on with it. Everyone had a hard time during the pandemic, and we were privileged enough to make a film. And then, which is a very privileged job. So you're not going to get me to complain about the pandemic. You have to get on with it. Other people were stuck in their small apartments for a year or two and taking care of children who couldn't go to school. Much harder.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. I think we're now in the Q&A part of this session. Now there's one by Angela Dix who says, I thought Patrick Melrose was brilliant. I'm interested in hearing what challenges, if any, Edward faced in directing English actors performing a story about the English upper classes.
Wonderful question. Thank you for the compliment. I read Patrick Melrose when I was 22 or 23. And I fell in love with those books, and I always wanted to make them. And when that book, the opportunity to make them, fell into my lap, I just lapped it up. And I think it's so universal. And so I also grew up in a very Anglophile household. My father grew up in South Africa, and we went to England a lot, and so it didn't feel foreign to me. No, I mean, not challenges like you have in any other movie. On All Quiet, we had the mud, and on Patrick Melrose, it just felt intuitive to me, and I just love the humor with which Teddy St. Aubin, Edward St. Aubin, the writer, writes this book, and that lacerating, eviscerating, acerbic, sarcastic humor, I just loved it. And so I think it's kind of universal.
There is a question by Peter Barnes, and that's actually another thing I wanted to talk to you about. So this is great. The film is very different from the novel in important respects. No scene with the French girls, the new parallel plot of the armistice negotiations, the totally changed ending. What was your thinking behind making such radical changes from the novel? Sorry, not the
very good question. Thank you very much. To me, Remarque wrote this book in the 1920s. First of all, you mentioned Remarque being welcoming to film adaptations, and he always I read an interview with him where he said, I want the film to be, its own. It can't just make my book, because then why not just read the book? And so when reading that, it gave me the courage to make those changes, because I certainly questioned myself. But I felt like he gave me his permission from the grave through this interview. So that was the first thing. It was the first hurdle to climb, and there were a lot of hurdles to climb to get over with this book. The second was that Remarque wrote this book in the 1920s. I was born in 1970, 25 years after the Second World War, and I felt I cannot make this movie without pointing towards the future. That the First World War wasn't, 17 million people died. You could think that we learned something from this lesson, but no, 20 years later, we started the Second World War. And I can't ignore that. I felt like I'm privileged enough to have the perspective on history that Remarque didn't have yet. And the fact that or the scenes in the forest in Compiègne with Daniel Brühl negotiating the armistice, they are basically the kernel of the Second World War, because Erzberger was killed a few years later by German nationalists for his so-called betrayal of the German victory. The military used this narrative of that they were stabbed in the back by the politics, and that they actually would have won the war, and a complete invention, and that politics sold them out. And Erzberger was made the scapegoat for this and was killed. And this whole narrative and the signing of the armistice gave rise to the German Nazi Party. And so I wanted to put that in the movie. I just felt like I couldn't ignore the Second World War now from our privileged perspective today. And so we included that in terms of just subtly pointing towards the future. Though we didn't learn anything from First World War, but started the Second. And then the ending is a natural consequence of that. The armistice automatically puts the movie at the end of the Second World War, at the First World War. And that also then, I did a lot of research on the end of the First World War, and there were a lot of people that were sent into the battle in the last hours just so people could go away, that the generals or the officers could go away with a win or a victory or some sense of pride. And I felt that wasn't, as the story now takes place at the end of the war, that's an interesting detail to include. By the way, on both sides, on American sides and German sides, they sent their kids into battle just before. And anyway, that was the thinking behind it. And then the very end isn't, he dies in both book and film. So I felt that has to be the same. But anyway, I'm not really, I always find, it's subjective interpretation of this book. Everybody would make a different film. It's my interpretation or mine and my team's interpretation. And I feel it's interesting to add something to a book, just like Apocalypse Now didn't make, Hearts of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, but it took that story and placed it somewhere completely different. I find it interesting to get that inspiration and then add something from a filmmaker's perspective, because it is a different medium. It's not a book. Exactly. It's just a different kind of medium now.
Yeah, and I think the reception has shown how well it works. And I mean, the addition of Matthias Erzberger, I think has caused lots of further debate and thinking about what actually after. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I certainly questioned it too. If I could do it. No, I mean. Ernst Toller wrote a review of Remarque's book in 1929 and said, this is the most important anti-war book and everybody should read it and it should be translated. It should be, he really said this needs to be put out there and adapted and read as, consumed by as many people as possible, and you contributed to that. So, but let me see whether there are any other questions. There is one about the music. Somebody wants to know whether, hang on, where was that? And somebody wants to know about the biggest production challenge that you had not anticipated, and also how you become a film director.
Okay, those are
to become a film director. Is wondering how you got into this career and if you have any advice.
So the biggest challenge was certainly the mud and the cold. And, having, for example, my crew always showed me their fitness bands in the evening. They were wearing heavy gear with rubber boots and, waders and thick jackets and lugging equipment around. They often came to me and showed me that they had run or walked a half marathon that day. So it was really a physical, strenuous experience. That was probably one of the biggest challenges, just the pure physicality of it and the logistical coordination of all the elements that you just have to combine. And how I got into filmmaking was I just was always interested in theater. I come from Wolfsburg, which is not a big city. It didn't have many cinemas. It had one cinema that showed basically big blockbusters. But we had a small art house cinema in the next city over, Braunschweig, which is where I the bus very often. I always flock to those type of movies for some reason. I just, it's just in you. The type of, it's not nothing you decide. It's just you flock towards it. And in this case, I flocked towards the art house movies, and I worked in I did an internship in a theater and so forth. But to be honest, I never knew that filmmaking is a profession. To me, that was maybe some distant Hollywood, American, the actors made it, because those are the people that I saw on screen. So I thought, okay, they make the films. And then I never thought about that there's a director and a writer and a producer and a grip and electric and all these things. I just had no clue. And then I went to art school with my school at 14 on a field trip. And I saw that they had a film course, and I went home and I flipped out and I said, they make, you can study film. And my brother kind of wiped it away and said, you can't, you're going to have to drive a cab later on when you're older, because it's not a profession. And then I thought, oh, he's probably right. And then, but it didn't leave me. I just eventually just couldn't shake it. It's a calling in a way. Like if you want to make it, I actually went, one day I visited a engineering math prep course because I thought I would study engineering like my brothers and my father. And I sat in this room and I thought, I can't do it. And then I went across the street to the art school. And it's just sort of, you can't help yourself, I think. And then you just keep at it, and then eventually you're part of the film industry.
But I mean, you've also been flexible. I mean, you kind of build your career steadily. You put yourself out there. You took on jobs when you were young. I mean, you were saying you loved art films. I think it's probably difficult if one wants to start out with that, right? And
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the director. Some people start out like that. It just happens. I felt like I didn't have enough security yet or enough to say yet. So I didn't quite know what type of film I wanted to make and how I want. So I needed to learn. I needed to just learn and make mistakes and do it again and think like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. So next time I'm going to try this. So it just, just
different aspects involved, and little stuff, and that's very interesting. Somebody also wants to know how you chose the composer and whether you had right from the beginning decided on such a contemporary sound.
I basically showed him the film. I know Volker for a long time. He did the score for Patrick Melrose also, and for 2 other films that I made. So he was kind of a no-brainer, and we had worked together a lot. And I like his way of making music unconventionally. It's just different from everything else. And so I told him, I need 3 things. I need you to destroy the images. I don't want you to make it historic. Destroying kind of means, make them kaput. Sort of.
In the sense Brecht's alienation.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit Brechtian. It's just sort of different from what you actually see on the image. Especially different period. Maybe making it contemporary. I didn't prescribe that, but I said it's got to be, make it like Brecht. And then the second one is I want to feel what is inside Paul's stomach. So try to find a sound for that. And the third one is, do something you've never done before and people have never heard before. That was sort of the guiding, those 3 thoughts were the guiding light.
Yeah. Hang on, there is a message from Antonia, which has just disappeared again. Hang on, where is the message? Antonia. I think it's this message here. What do you think the film's success has done for German filmmakers, producers, and also stories? Can one film make a big difference? Is it your impression that it has opened doors or made studios take more interest?
Well, it's a very difficult time for films right now. We have 2 strikes. We have a consolidation. So it's certainly not a time for risk from the studios. But I hope that the film opens doors, and I kind of wish that the German film industry is very secluded. It doesn't open its doors very widely. And it doesn't look very much, I feel, this is a bit of a criticism, I guess. It doesn't really look very far. And whenever there's something that tries to break that boundary, there's sort of a worry or a skepticism. I wish there could be a little bit more sort of openness, or because I want to share that impetus that certainly I feel. I mean, I certainly feel from anybody in England or America who finance these films, an openness and I want to bring a lot of people along. And I wish more people would jump that boat. That would be wonderful.
Thank you so much, Edward. I think we are out of time, but
thank you very much.
And thank
Such
you
a pleasure talking to you.
Sharing so much about the making of the film and the reception. And I think your very strong and precise vision has certainly made a difference. And, hopefully we'll see many more films like All Quiet on the Western Front in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Yes, thank you also from me so much to Edward Berger and to Christiane Schönfeld for joining us this evening and for taking the time to really delve into the important and powerful anti-war film that is All Quiet on the Western Front. A lot of ground was covered, and I hope that our audience has been inspired to rewatch the film against the backdrop of these new and very valuable insights. Thanks also to everyone in the audience for joining us this evening and for asking your very interesting questions. A recording of the event will be available on our website later, and we very much encourage you to ask friends and family to check it out as well. After a short break in August, the BJ will be back in September with an exciting programme of events for the autumn, including a conversation on disinformation with Jessica Cecil, founder and director of the BBC Trusted News Initiative, talk with John Kampfner on his new book, In Search of Berlin, and finally a conversation with Jürgen Kraus, who is the 2021 semi-finalist of the Great British Bake Off. So quite a varied programme, as we always like to have it at the BGA. But once again, thank you so much to Christiane and to Edward and to everyone in the audience, and I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you very much.
Antonia, thanks for having me as well. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.